Welcome to this 10-minute teardown, one of our series of 10-minute webinars in which we look to address key procurement and finance topics in coffee break-sized sessions. This episode focuses on what it takes to prime an organisation for successful supplier relationship management, the key steps to put in place, and how software can help support that programme. So firstly, I'm going to be taking a look at what it takes to put an effective SRM programme in place and what the challenges are there, because it's one of the more challenging areas we see clients address, and it's important to recognise those challenges and plan to face and overcome them from the outset. Secondly, I'm going to quickly touch on what's involved in bringing other stakeholders along on the journey and ensuring they recognise that SRM is an activity worth supporting and investing in. And I'm going to finish on how Web3 SRM from Wax Digital helps support a supplier relationship program to give the best possible results in different business scenarios and environments. One of the first challenges we see with SRM is that the term means different things to different people and different organisations. And that's despite the fact that we all practice SRM. Every organisation, even if only intuitively, understands which are its most important and potentially highest risk suppliers. And as a consequence, people in the organisation invest time, care and energy in evaluating the ongoing performance of those suppliers. But while in some organisations that is a very structured ongoing programme, in most others it's a rather more ad hoc process. And that's often reflected in the model that those organisations adopt, whether as a conscious business process decision or again just as a sort of natural evolution. So the three main models we see are illustrated here, to some extent in order of maturity, although that's by no means a hard and fast rule. A centralised model assumes a dedicated team that very actively manages suppliers from the centre. A hub and spoke model assumes a level of central control for perhaps some key suppliers, but then other stakeholders in the business look after specific suppliers or categories. And then a decentralised model is more of a free-for-all, where effectively those stakeholders do their own thing with the suppliers they work with. Now, whatever model you pursue, there are three key pillars supporting it. Getting accurate and up-to-date supplier information in the first place, formalising an actual process for doing again what many organisations already do, but in a very unstructured and devolved manner, and creating a process which is built on continual improvement. But one thing that's important in all those principles is to be pragmatic about making supplier management work in resource-constrained, time-limited organisations, and recognising that good practice might look very different if you're a high street bank versus a hospitality business or a manufacturing company. So a key foundation to effective supplier management is making sure you have good data in the first place. And you can do this manually and iteratively, targeting only your top suppliers first perhaps, or utilise a solution like Web3 Supplier Information Management to cleanse your entire supplier dataset and empower suppliers to keep it up to date online thereafter. With a clean dataset, you can then tier suppliers in terms of criticality. And criticality isn't simply down to spend, but a range of other factors too, such as scarcity of supply, impact of business interruption, or reputational impact. It's also important to identify and plot stakeholder relationships. Who actually looks after key suppliers now, and who will be taking on that role in the future? We usually see clients group suppliers into between 3 and 5 tiers, so let's take the middle ground and set it at 4. And those will usually break down into these sort of classifications and volumes, assuming that you've got, say, 1,500 suppliers in total. So the top couple of tiers represent around 10% of your supply chain. And most organisations have a level of optimisation here because these again are key suppliers. So there is a tacit understanding that people across the business need to be managing and measuring them. It's simply that activity is undertaken in an unstructured, unsystematic manner, probably by lots of different stakeholders in isolation from one another. But then the middle layer very often don't even have that level of oversight, and just leaving them to their own devices is not an effective supply chain management strategy, because maybe they're the critical suppliers of the future, or maybe they're taking advantage of flying under the radar, and so playing fast and loose with contract terms or pricing or delivery performance. So good SRM means creating structure and focus across more than just your top few suppliers. When bringing a new supplier on board, it means categorizing that supplier, assigning it a management tier from day one, and applying as a consequence the appropriate activity plan, so that a schedule of activities gets applied relative to the importance of the supplier to you as an organisation, all of which demonstrates that you care about that supplier. And I choose the word care advisedly, because it provides a handy acronym for the key constituents of the SRM lifecycle, where collecting the base data provides the collateral to drive the series of actions or activities associated with the relevant supplier tier. Ongoing review measures the outcomes from those activities and informs the evolution of each supplier engagement, part of which means building a successful working relationship, a true business partnership with your suppliers, and part of which means they know they're being watched and held accountable, and so evolution may mean a change of supplier. And your care plan can be expressed in terms as complex or as simple as fits your sector, your trading profile, your resources, the scale of your organisation. All the macro factors that dictate what good practice looks like for you as a business. Because supplier management programs vary greatly in maturity. And while Gartner's framework for supplier management, illustrated in this slide as an example, provides procurement professionals with the full set of activities they need to manage suppliers effectively, it's not a one-size-fits-all concept. Pick and choose what makes sense for you, but then enshrine it into a formal management program, defining the governance and processes necessary for you and your business situation. And then keep on building that program. Supplier management doesn't have to start at the zenith of what's possible. It should grow and evolve over time with repetition and learning. But it does have to start somewhere. And that somewhere will always involve others across and beyond the business, influencing stakeholders and bringing them on the SRM journey. And we found that the best way to garner support is to identify the friction or the risk, the impact that applies to each of your stakeholder communities in the decision-making process and highlight those factors to them. So for finance, who is it that keys data into the finance system? Who has to make changes? For sales, what happens to your contract if your customer finds that our supply chain is not compliant? What about reputational damage? For legal, if there's a supply chain issue, are you comfortable fronting up the legal submission that clearly shows how we've done everything that could reasonably be expected of us to ensure our suppliers are properly accredited? And for production, of course, if one of your direct suppliers goes out of business, what is the impact on the production line? So hit on the right pinch points for your audience, and the case makes itself. Do also, of course, take into account what those other stakeholders might already be doing in silos to address some of those issues. And that goes down a sliding scale from potentially quite sophisticated solutions like QA and contract management to general purpose, often very basic systems underpinned by spreadsheets and email. But you still have to recognise that any change, even if it's a change for the better, is still change. And that needs to be communicated and managed accordingly, which means winning the hearts and minds of the people you need to make the change. And putting in place the right tools to provide a platform for success. A spreadsheet and email-based approach would require an army of supplier managers to keep the process on track. So the only way to drive a really effective supplier management program is through software. Software that facilitates supplier onboarding and ongoing data management, automatically schedules meetings, surveys and scorecards, and provides immediate insight into risk and performance. All of which means the software can do the heavy lifting, or the process enforcement and compliance, so it becomes realistic for even a small team to put in place a comprehensive supplier management program. Enabling you to more easily collect and aggregate data from all of those key stakeholders, so consumers, the people using the supplier services or products, supplier managers, those who own the supplier relationship in your business, the suppliers themselves, of course, and any system data, which historically might be things like delivery rates, contract obligations, and so on. To programmatically apply oversight and management to those suppliers based on their tiering, with obviously different levels of activity again against each of those tiers, but creating a consistent business-wide process for managing and monitoring suppliers at every level. And that needn't be a hugely complex exercise. You can start just at the top, with strategic suppliers and target risk first or performance and then grow that program over time. But put in place the mechanics to gather data and manage the process, and then have that data automatically wrapped up into scorecards that clearly define where performance, risk or value issues need to be addressed and acted upon, that present supplier management information in a meaningful way to allow you to take that action on it. So, to conclude, the single biggest takeaway in our experience is to avoid the temptation of trying to eat the elephant and think that implementing a formal SRM program means taking your SRM existing processes from bronze to platinum in a single step. That is not the case. It's an iterative process that can start small and pragmatically. But do recognise that putting in place a new or digitising an existing SRM program requires good planning and proper resource allocation. And while great SRM software is not a magic bullet that changes that, it is an enabler that will allow you to go much further, faster and more effectively. So have a clear view of what you want to achieve at the outset, understand the practicalities and the influencing work to be done, and set yourself up for success by underpinning it with a great software solution. Which is, of course, my cue to say that if you're ready to start thinking about that software solution, please reach out and we'd be delighted to talk to you about how Web3 can help.